Hey, Pitt, it often occurs to me that life is hit and myth.
Have you suddenly developed a lisp?
No, I meant myth with a TH. Now, myths by definition are fictional, but sometimes it's only through fiction that we discover the truth.
And myths drive American life and culture much more than you might think.
You may be surprised. That's next on Radically Rational, the podcast. Hello and welcome to this episode of Radically Rational, the podcast. We are bringing facts back into fashion. We're trying to make simple sanity sexy again. We are saying no to crazies of all stripes because crazy is not cool. Those are the rules. If I violate them, I get busted by an 8-year-old girl.
That's just not logical.
And I pretty much do whatever my granddaughter tells me to do. I'm Paul. This is Anthony, also known as Pitt. We're going to be talking a lot about myths right now, so I'm going to give you a chance to come clean. Are there any myths about Anthony Pittman that we need to correct?
That I'm 6'1". Outside of that, I don't think so.
See,
not that I know of.
I'm going to take the opposite tack. Anything you've heard is a myth, okay? I'm going to go shaggy on you. Wasn't me. I didn't do it. But this whole thing about myths is fascinating.
It really is.
So why don't we talk to an expert? Dr. Dennis Slattery, one of the country's really preeminent scholars and such a fascinating academic field and discipline. Doctor of Mythological Studies. How did you get drawn to that in the first place?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. You know, I've been teaching literary classics, high school, undergrad, grad level. And then, and I spent 10 years at University of Incarnate Word in their English department, and I loved it. But I was bored. I needed to have challenges in the classroom. I wasn't getting it. So a former professor of mine from graduate school at the University of Dallas was invited out to Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California, to teach. And after he was teaching, his name's Robert Romanishin. He's still in my life, 50-some years later, and a close friend. He finagled a slot for me to fly out on the weekend to teach in the MA counseling program. And the Saturday class was on either myth, literature, or religious studies. So I chose literature. Then I did that for about a year and a half, and then they had a shakeup with the faculty, and the provost called and said, "What would it take to get you out here full time?" And I said, not a lot,
to be
honest with you. But you got to help me with the Santa Barbara price tags for rent houses and if you're going to buy. And I accepted it. So we moved in December of 95 out there. And as I was teaching, I learned that Joseph Campbell used to come and teach there. He'd fly in from Hawaii or he'd fly in from New York. And we had his library that he had given to the school. So I said, you know, I remember watching The Power of Myth with Bill Moyers that was released in 1988.
And it was brilliant.
And it was brilliant. Campbell died of cancer before it was released, so he never saw the nine episodes. And I thought, wait a minute, here's a chance to combine literature and mythology as he did. He was a medieval literature genius. And he started to look at literary classics with a mythic lens. And I said, I want to do that. So I started. And then when it came up to add a class on Campbell at a faculty meeting, nobody put their hand up. And I said, I'll teach it. So I did for 14 years. And I would change the books out, so I was not all the time, but often reading new texts.
Okay.
And I thought, well, I love this guy. Plus, I found out that the Campbell clan and the Slattery clan are both from County Mayo in southern part of northwestern Ireland. And I thought, geez, maybe he's related to me.
This was all meant to happen.
This
for
was
sure.
all mythically happening and synchronistic, to use a good Jungian
Well,
phrase.
it really is, Dennis, because, the overlap there, we talk literature, we talk mythology.
Yeah.
The similarities are that in many cases we learn truth through fiction, whether it's in novel form or mythological form. These, in many cases, by definition, were events that didn't happen,
Yes.
but they were concepts that were legitimate.
Yeah. So, to just underscore the truth of what you just said, Jim Hillman, kind of the father of archetypal psychology, who would come and teach regularly at Pacifica, and that's where I got to know him. No, I got to know him in Dallas, and then we had a friendship out in Pacifica. He would quote, and I'm going to forget this classics writer, who said, "Myths never happened, therefore they're always happening." The paradox
Perfect.
of that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I thought you were going to cite that work because you laid out the concept. These are fictions, but they carry universal truths that go back into prehistory. So that's what I love about myths. And then, of course, Carl Jung's work at Pacifica is front and center. Freud's less so. And this was Jung's notion, in which he reintroduced the notion of archetypes. That is, that they are imprinted patterns in the psyche that have been with us since the dawn of humanity. And Jung offered this analogy that helped me. Archetypes are to the psyche as instincts are to the body.
Perfect.
So when you take that analogy, you get a sense of, you can start playing with the idea that myths themselves are embodied. In other words, there's a part of our biology that is mythology. And Campbell wrote about that. And in my graduate work in phenomenology, I honed in on the human body as a gestural field. And when I read this, that Campbell saw bios as mythos, I thought this is an opportunity to extend what I'd been doing in grad school and just scratch the surface. So that's how I entered the world of myth. But I didn't know until I got steeped in Campbell and other writers that I was teaching myth when I would teach Moby Dick or Toni Morrison's Beloved or Homer's Odyssey. But I didn't have the mythic consciousness necessary to be able to teach one of these classics in a mythology program and inflect it towards the myth that's like under the floorboards,
Right.
running the engines of that classic work or poetry or Greek tragedy. So Pacifica was the best job I've ever had in my life. I've been there 27 years.
They're lucky to have you for sure. And this idea that we're all imprinted with mythological
Yes.
archetypes, I think, one, it's fascinating. Two, it's undeniable. And three, we're unaware of it consciously a lot of times to the extent to which it actually affects our lives, our cultures, our country. We're talking about myths, and we're going to return to that. But unfortunately, right now, I'd like to talk about something that is an undeniable historical fact. We're recording this one day away from the 52nd anniversary of the slaughter, the massacre at Kent State University. Dennis Slattery, you were there.
Sandy and I were both teaching in the Ravenna Schools District about 10 miles east of Kent. I was teaching special education, grades 1 through 5. That's where I started my teaching career. Now I'm 53 years in the classroom. Sandy was teaching in the Ravenna School District, and I think you were teaching math and history.
5th grade.
5th grade. So I was trying to finish up an MA in comparative literature. And the principal, this is now spring quarter of 1970, She and I had started teaching in Ravenna September of 68, 69, 69, 70. So we were coming up on the second year of our teaching. And we had already applied for teaching positions in Lorain, Ohio, where I subsequently began teaching at Lorain Catholic High School and Sandy at St. Peter's Middle School. So I had permission from the school principal because I could finish all of the coursework that spring. And he said, okay, you leave, what time is your class going to be? And I said, I want to take this class at 2 p.m. It's every Monday. He said, I'll take your class from lunch till the rest of the day so that you don't go to class and then drive back here for 20 minutes. I said, this is beautiful. Thank you.
Sure.
So I wound up on the campus at 1:45, 20 to 2 on May 4th, 1970. At 12:24 that afternoon, the first M1 rifle was fired. And the entire slaughter took 13 seconds. So I parked my car. I walked into Satterfield Hall, which was the English department building, and it was empty. Now, usually at that time of day, there's 150, 175 students changing classes. It was a two-story. So a lot of hustle and bustle. And I walked in, and it was completely empty, and I thought, I've just entered the twilight zone. I wonder, could it be Sunday? I said, no, because I just left the school. And I had no context for what had happened. So I'm standing in the hall wondering what to do. And from the door down the corridor, a professor, Professor Merovitz, an English professor, came in and was running down the hall, and I was poised to ask him, and I saw he was going to run by me. And so I stopped him, and I grabbed him, and I pushed him up against the wall, and I said, where the hell is everybody? And his eyes were literally rolling in his head, and he said, they're murdering our students. And I let my hands down. Again, I had no context, and then he ran off. So I left the Satterfield Hall, and there is a rise. Kent's main campus is hilly. So I walked out of the door up a hill to a lip around a commons area. It's picture a saucer with a lip 3/4 around it, and then down on the commons area. And as I walked up, I started to see people. And in fact, there were 2,500. They were so silent. They were all in PTSD. But again, I had no context. And then here were National Guards, young guys, 4 in a group, bayonets on the rifles, all facing out, and I looked at their faces. Again, I had no, because they had taken the 4 that were killed and the 9 that were wounded off campus. And everybody was in shell shock. And when I looked at their faces, it terrified me because I saw a combination of rage and terror. I walked into the crowd, and something told me, don't start asking questions, and I didn't. I was there about 5 minutes before we all noticed that the police, not the National Guard, the police were ordered to get in a row 2 by 2, and they did. And then they charged the hill. And everybody, again, I'm there without a context, but everyone else there had a context, and they scattered. They ran. They hid under cars. They hid on they just made an assumption. They're going to take another round at us. That went on, and it was so terrifying to watch them run. And I saw the danger, but I didn't have the context for what that danger was going to promote. And then a car, and I remember it was a convertible, drove across the Commons area with bullhorns that said, by order of James A. Rhodes, this school is officially closed, because Rhodes yanked it out from under Bob White, who was a good president of Kent. And the bullhorns went on. All students vacate the campus in 4 hours. Now we're talking 20,000 students. In 4 hours, the campus emptied.
When did you start? I'm kind of curious with all this happening. You mentioned you had no context. When did you start emotionally feeling what was going on? When did you start to react yourself?
Yeah, wonderful question, Anthony. When I looked in the eyes of those National Guardsmen and I saw something, and they were responding to what they had just participated in on one form or another. That I think was the initial key. And then I found myself running.
Okay.
Thinking, they know something I don't. They're running, I'm going to run. So I ran back to my car and drove home to a rent house that we had, a mile and a half from Kent. Then it set up a martial law for about 10 days to 2 weeks. If you left Kent, fine. If you wanted to come back into Kent, you had to have a driver's license with a Kent address or some proof of an address that you lived in Kent. And of course we did, because we were teaching full time.
Right.
So we moved back and forth. But I'll never forget, like a day or two later, and the curfew was either 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Our rent house, we rented the middle floor. There was people that rented the top, just the top, and then there was a basement. About 7 o'clock, we hear noises, and we look out the window and we see these 3 guys, might have been students, but young guys, walking. Suddenly, this black limo pulls up, and these 5 guys in black suits get out, grab them, throw them in the car, slam the doors, and squealed off. I mean, we could talk a lot about the overreaction and this is my read. Small tanks rolling down the streets. I mean, this is what I think a tyrannical state looks like. I mean, it was, let's shut everything down. Then for 20 years, the battles were fought in the Cleveland courts of who was responsible. And at the end of 2 decades, no one was.
Let's contextualize this and just reemphasize why this is so important, why this was such a horrifying milestone. Let's review what's going on. Vietnam still raging. We're coming off the horrendous urban riots of 68 and 69 and 70. There is all of this turmoil. And it strikes me that this is one of those times, Dennis, that what got to everybody, and I was 15 years old at the time, a sophomore in high school, you saw this, and it was a loss of national innocence.
Yes.
Okay? It's the day the music died. You can't believe this is happening in the United States of America. Right. And there is this iconic picture, and perhaps we have it, and we'll show it to you, but there is this horrified female student who is kneeling at the fallen body of one of the 4 who have just been murdered.
Yes.
She's so horrified, she's so terrified, but she's looking toward this line of National Guardsmen who have just done this, and you can see it in her eyes.
Yes.
What in the world? Yeah. This can't be my country anymore.
Yeah. That was Mary Vecchio, 14 years old. And if you go online, she never talked about it until recently. And you go online and you see her today. I mean, this beautiful woman, but she was a runaway. And William James, the name of the young man who was dead in the parking lot of the education, building. William, I can look it up.
It's okay.
Look at that. But I ended that article that I wrote in 2020 that this was the moment where, I mean, it was one thing for Vietnam to come into the country on our televisions, but here was the Vietnam War and the incursion into Cambodia.
Right.
As Nixon was promising, I'm backing out of this whole thing, and the outrage around that. And there was a lot of damage done in downtown Kent the night before, breaking windows, trying to start buildings on fire. I haven't done a lot of the reading on it, but there's enough evidence to suggest outside agitators came in pretending they were students and doing the damage to stain the student body of Kent. Could have been some of the students themselves. So there was turmoil, and you just gave it a larger vortex of what was going on for years. It was the culmination of pent-up feelings, misdirections, and it felt like this was a time when political divisiveness really was given a birth, or aggravated, exaggerated onto a new level. Yeah.
And we thought it could not get further elevated in our history.
No.
And boy, were we wrong.
Were we wrong. And the aftermath, in addition to what you're saying, the quick move to cover it up. They drew plans up to build an ROTC building on the commons where the guards were shooting from. Let's erase it. And then they fought for 20 years the construction of a memorial that would fix it in the national memory. And the outrage across the country silenced that movement. So when I took my sons in 1990, the wall had just been put in place, and it's a magnificent, and Joe, you have been there, it's a magnificent, modest, but elegant wall. And on the concrete, here's the wall, on the concrete here, on a bronze plaque are the names of the 4 that were slain. Yeah. Ellison Krauss was one. I had them memorized, and I'm not pulling them up, but I wanted to carry their names in me. Yeah.
Understandably, and that is a part of our history. And Pitt and Dennis, what saddens me is you ask yourself the question, what have we ultimately learned? And the sad, true answer is absolutely nothing. History repeats itself. The past is prologue. As we record this, it was just days ago that the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump, was recorded as saying that anybody who was participating in the George Floyd protests should have been shot.
Yeah.
Flashback 52 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, I brought with me, I won't open it up, but this is the Atlantic, the May Atlantic, and I want to read just the title of the lead article. Oh, gosh. It's by Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. There it is. After Babel, how social media dissolved the mortar of society and made America stupid. And it's brilliant on the techno myth of social media, where no one from nowhere, can muster enough outrage to go to the top of the Facebook list and actually have an audience of millions. I mean, this is beyond Brave New World.
Unfortunately, for so many, that's Facebook and social media outlets, of course, we know, are their only means for news, or their acceptable means for news. I have a question about Kent State, though, some 52 years later. I can't speak for officials at the university, but in your opinion, has there been an attempt by officials there to let sleeping dolls lie and not revisit this any longer, just move forward and, I don't want to say forget about Kent State, but not memorialize it any longer?
No, and as a matter of fact, what was so great, last year, well, two things I'd like to say. So we moved to Oberlin, Ohio, and then drove the 12 miles to our new teaching jobs. As May 4th of 1971, the first anniversary was coming around, I asked 4 seniors, 1 woman, 3 guys, would you like to go with me down to Kent on May 4th for this commemoration? They said, absolutely. And they didn't know my whole story, but they knew enough. So we left. It's 45 miles from Lorain to Kent. So we left, and Anthony, I'm going to come back because your question's really a good one. And we got there. I parked in the same spot that I parked at the year before.
Wow.
It was my way of ritualizing this return and bringing these 4 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds. We parked, we walked to the Commons grass, and here's Allen Ginsberg on the ground with about 40 students around him chanting Aum.
Oh, okay.
And
Powerful.
we sat and started to chant Aum. Then Gary Snyder, a very Buddhist, authentically Buddhist imagination, read some of his poetry. And so then I walked them, the 4, around to the different places. Last February, Father's Day, February of 2021, I arranged with 2 of these guys who are in their 60s now, really successful. I said, I want to come up to Ohio, Northern Ohio, on Father's Day, and I want to go back down to Kent, which would be 51 years, because the 50th, one of them and I had hotel reservations, tickets for different talks, and then COVID said,
Pandemic.
Don't you dare bring 40, 50,000 people here. So they did some on Zoom, but it wasn't the same. You really had to be at the place. So 2021, we met at my brother's house in Euclid, Ohio, and we drove down to Kent, and it was a Sunday, I think. And this just gives me chills. This is what I talked about yesterday on the Zoom call to Pacifica. I tried to park in the same space. There were a couple of other cars there. Okay. We walked over to Satterfield Hall. Now, it's a Sunday, no classes. It's Father's Day. They're all doing other things. And just for the heck of it, I tried the door on Satterfield Hall, and it was unlocked.
Oh, what a story.
It was unlocked, and I looked at them, and they looked at me, and we walked in.
Yeah.
And we walked down that hall. Here's the door to the English department office, and then here's the wall where I grabbed Marovitz 51 years earlier, and I put my hands on the wall, and I could feel his sport coat fabric in my hands. In other words, it went from my head right into my body. And I said, this is where the first inkling that something horrific has happened. And then we walked out the door, and I said, walk with me to go out as I did 51 years ago. And we did. Now, there are, I see them as pilgrimage stations. I don't know how many there are, 12 or 14, and they lead up to the memorial. And so these large laminated with photos. Here's what happened here. And then I think there was a way that you used your phone to bring up an audio by getting it registered, and we'd stand and we'd listen, and then we'd go to the next one, and we did that for about 2 hours. So, Anthony, the opposite has happened, and I don't know the power brokers behind it, but the school realizes that it is a place of devastation and a place of memorializing something that should not be forgotten, that amnesia should not take over that campus. And it just did our hearts good to see how open-faced the school had become.
Dennis, that's so inspiring, and this is what scares me. And Pitt, this is going to sound like hyperbole, but I'll promise you that in our present climate, if they could, there would be people who deny that ever happened, just like the Holocaust.
No question.
It's imperative that we do this not just to honor the memory of the fallen, but to debunk the garbage that would seep in if we allowed it to. And guys, this all relates to mythology. And Dennis, you've already referenced this, the chaos that is social media. We have this myth about free speech. We have mythologically redefined freedom. But with respect to myths, in public discourse, somebody's myth is not a rebuttal to somebody else's fact, which is what Radically Rational is all about.
Yeah, so it's really a wonderful way to state it. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I've reread the former president of the University of Dallas's book. Donald Cowan is his name, a physicist. He published a book in 1988 called Unbinding Prometheus, Education for the Coming Age. And in there, he has a chapter on the myth of fact. And he points this out, and it feels like it really does fit right here, that for hundreds of years, facts were always embedded in a context. But he says somewhere around the 15th or 16th century in Italy, facts disassociated themselves from their home.
Okay.
And became facts in and of themselves. So they were no longer rooted in history. And
they were free radicals.
They were free
floating around.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And so Don, a prophetic man, yet couldn't have grasped the full extent of what he had tripped across. That, facts speak for themselves. Well, we know that's horsepucky. Facts don't speak for themselves. Facts need an interpretive context in order to make sense, because facts by themselves they're inert. And so what has happened with this freeing of facts from context and their histories is that facts themselves now become open targets for assassination.
That could not be put any better. And we have decided that we're free to untether ourselves from facts. And Dennis, you're exactly right. They must be contextualized, but they are a critical part and necessary part of the equation. And now we have people not only rejecting facts, not only distorting facts, we have people, Pitt, rejecting the very concept of the existence of facts.
Or alternate facts.
And alternate facts. So the deeper, well said, the deeper implications is ontological. It gets to the very heart of being itself. How are we going to be as human beings with this shattering of a common cluster of realities that we can all agree on? We can argue them, we can interpret them, but fundamentally we agree on them. That's what's dropping out quickly.
Absolutely. At one time, we were at least drinking out of the same trough and digesting it differently.
Yeah.
Now we just don't do that
anymore.
And that's at the point where you're just completely talking past each other. I don't want to get bogged down in this, and if we do, it's my fault. But one of the myths that we have adopted, I think, is that this idea that all opinions are equal and all voices must be heard. No, they're not, and no, they don't.
Yeah. You know, I've watched in education, I don't know how far back I should go, 15 years, maybe longer, when it became when attacks on liberal learning, on the humanities, became overt. Mm-hmm. I listened to one guy on some radio show or news show berating, and this is years ago, berating the parents of two young people, one of whom wanted to major in music and the other in art. And
why do you want to waste your life like that?
That's the message. That's the message. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You should be getting degrees in accounting and business, and just ripping into the parents as if he had a truth that was worth sharing. And when I heard that, and then there have been governors in different states, both north and south, who cut the funding for liberal learning. And I think it's all part, and you know, two of my favorite novels are 1984 and Brave New World. But then Chris Hedges, in his book, The Empire of Illusion, The Demise of the Intellect and the Rise of Distraction. It's brilliant, this guy, Washington Post reporter who has been fired at in so many places in the world as he did reporting. And we got to know him because we brought him to Pacifica Graduate Institute. But this Make America Stupid, there's this dumbing down because you've got to make the psyche of the population you want to control turn to porridge because they can't think themselves out of a paper bag.
And sadly, it's not just a byproduct, Dennis, of ignorance. It is a stated goal. There is this populist movement that has open disdain for knowledge.
And for thought. And for conversation like this. This is not good for tyrants. This is good for democracy.
I'm glad you mentioned that, though.
Please.
Because I think of a student going into your class for the first time, a young mind, and I ask this lightheartedly with a smile on my face, do they know what they're getting into?
Now, the adult...
But at some point, they enjoy what they've gotten into.
Yes.
That's what I imagine here.
Yes. And that's true even with the adults that I teach, because the average age of mythological studies students who come in the door is 34. I mean, we have people come in at 62 years old and say, I always wanted to study myth. I've made a lot of money. I'm bored out of my mind, and I have no soul. It shriveled up and died when I was about 36. I'm back here. So they're coming for transformation as well as information.
All right.
But it's not about data processing. They want their souls fed. And that's why I taught there for 27 years. I wanted my soul fed. And, you know, conversations around, and I taught Toni Morrison's Beloved. It's one of my favorite epics to teach. Get into questions of race and ethnicity and silencing people. And the slaves who would cut the sugar cane, they put these steel masks on them where they could breathe through it. They put them on so they wouldn't eat the sugar cane, but then they couldn't talk. Mm-hmm. So this is another big topic. Where we're witnessing the silencing of this group, this population, this belief. And however we want to respond to the leaked document out of the Supreme Court, it's about silencing a body of people. No, you can't express and do what you want with your body. We're telling you not to. And all of the ways, in New Braunfels, Beto O'Rourke, 3 weeks ago, was coming, they had it in the Herald Zeitung, on a Saturday. Friday, the place that had given him space pulled the plug and said, we're getting too many death threats. Sorry. Then they found a school, and the school superintendent, or the school board said, no, we don't let anybody give a talk that has a bias politically. 4 different places they slammed their doors on him Friday, Saturday morning. A rich rancher stepped forward. We weren't on the list, but invited 400 people to his ranch. Everything served, food, drinks, and Beto spoke there. New Braunfels is the same city in which when a bus from San Antonio to Austin promoting Biden, was surrounded by pickup trucks with big Trump signs, Trump flags, waving in the back. The New Braunfels police refused to respond. These people were feeling, we're going to be killed out here on I-35.
My wife and I were about a minute behind that bus.
Oh my gosh.
Just happenstance when that happened.
And the police never arrived.
It was scary.
Yes.
There was a long line of cars honking, motorcycles, trying to run that bus off the road. And other folks off the road who had nothing to do with that bus.
Oh my gosh. So this is, it's wonderful that you saw that. I mean, yes, but horrific. So my point is, we've really got to be so vigilant and resistant to where we're going to continue to see, now it's time to silence this group. Now it's time to kidnap this governor and silence her. I mean, but I feel the momentum is growing exponentially.
Dennis, it is. And the motivation, as you indicated, has always been clear. It is about silencing groups. And in particular, there are a lot of people who over the years, Pitt, have paid lip service to the idea of equality as citizens. Mm-hmm. But as soon as there was some actual tangible movement toward achieving equality, we can't have that. And you've already referenced this novel and others, but all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
Yes.
And that clearly is what is driving this.
Yes. Gavin Newsom was eloquent in his outrage on the news yesterday or today. I think we heard it today. He said, look at the hypocrisy here. This group is saying, women, you can't do that anymore. Even if your life is in jeopardy, you'll have to die having that child that was the product of a rape. So Gavin Newsom says, let me list all of the laws that would benefit women's health care, and I'm not going to be able to list them all, but everything having to do with the kind of social contract to take care of those who are on the margins, poor. He said, what they're for is birth. They're not for
they're not
giving
pro-life.
the life of
they're not
a
pro-life,
fetus.
they're pro-birth.
No. And he just cut right through it. He was just eloquent. And he would not be silenced. So this silencing is a radicalized form of tyranny, and it adds another chapter to 1984.
And as I said, several other novels that you cited, once again, truth through fiction, and that extends to mythology down since the beginning of time. And we're so happy to be talking about this with Professor of Mythological Studies, Dr. Dennis Slattery. And Dennis, the more I think about this, it just really is fascinating. And in preparing for this, and I so much enjoy speaking with you, I was trying to isolate particular myths that have particularly impacted American society. And I think you just touched on one, absolutely. And for lack of a better term, I'm not in any way, slandering his character. I'm going to call this the Paul Bunyan myth. We have completely embraced the idea that any collectivism is equal, that we're all supposed to be totally self-sufficient, and the perfect human being relies on no one, is dependent on no one, is obligated to interact with no one, and the stronger and more isolated you are, the better person you are. And I will just select this as an example. Look, this got nothing to do with the author of the statement. I'm not getting into this. But the crap in this particular case that Hillary Clinton took for referencing it takes a village. Folks, let me tell you who I am. I grew up in Lockhart, Texas, okay? I'm a Texan. I'm kind of a good old boy. Let me tell you straight up, a village raised me, okay? And I would not be here without that village. And we used to call that America. Yeah, and now we want to completely distance ourselves from any obligation to our fellow humans.
Yeah. That village at one time was just maybe just a block, but it was a village.
Yep. It was a village. Yeah. There's something I had and I just lost it. Yeah, thank you. One of my favorite goddesses is Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, and she just tapped me on the head. It's really also important to watch what's going on in school board meetings where parents say, "Don't you present anything that will make my child uncomfortable." I mean, this is a ruthless form of censorship perpetrated by people who haven't even read last week's newspaper.
And may I point out the irony? The people who are saying, don't do anything that would make my child uncomfortable. First of all, they're not uncomfortable. Give them some credit. Okay, they understand what's going on here. The only people who are uncomfortable with this would be the people that would like to do all this stuff again. That's the thing. But guys, the thing that drives me crazy, all this criticism and all this saying, don't do anything that would make my child think or become uncomfortable. These are the very people that walk around calling other people snowflakes. Nobody could be snowier and flakier than they are.
That's true. That's true. I wrote an op-ed piece on this guy Krauss up in Fort Worth who, to try to make a quick name for himself, compiled a list of 450 titles of books that he said we need to strip from every library in this state, and maybe we can do it nationally. A complete idiot. I wonder if he'd read any book from cover to cover. That's just my Irish coming up and sneaking in here. So I wrote a piece because the term pornography, which is another slippery term being bandied about, we can't have any kind of pornography visited on our children. Fair enough. So I wrote a rebuttal to what this guy is doing. And I said, I've spent 5 decades in the classroom. Some of the best classes have been when the students find that they disagree on something important, because here's an opportunity to A, listen with tolerance to someone else's point of view.
Of course. 2, advance your position without raising your voice, but by using language. And there were a couple of other things that I had mentioned. I said, these are the wonderful moments and opportunities for people to learn some of the social skills that social media is throwing out the window. Come on, Dennis. I'm totally entertained and I'm totally fulfilled as a human being staring at my phone for 18 hours. I don't need any human interaction. So a week later, they published a long letter from a guy who wanted to attack me. And the thing that he went after me for first
was that the photo, you know, I mean, I brought a couple of, not of that one, but, you know, they published, and they put this photo of me.
That's a good-looking dude.
Well, I thought so, too.
Yeah.
You like that guy. Yeah. So he criticized me for smiling. I mean, this is.
I would say
what,
but I believe it.
What
Yeah,
do you do with
I
it?
don't even
he
get
said,
that.
this smiling Slattery, and then went on and distorted what I had said. And I was going to respond, and I thought, don't bite the hook. Let this go. This guy has, if anybody read my article, I beg your pardon, and his response, know that there's, I'm going to use a Campbellian term, there is a mythic disassociation from what this guy said about my article and what the article said. Mm-hmm. So I just left it alone. So it's like I can be outraged and be an idiot in the outrage, but in the social media world, that scores points. So this is this topsy-turvydom that we've entered as a social unit, disassociated from each other on most levels.
To a large extent, the crazier it is, the more exaggerated it is, the more disconnected it is from logic, the more it's applauded.
Yeah.
The more popular it is.
And
I joke about this with, and my wife is in television news.
Oh.
And she works on investigative pieces and some hard-hitting stuff. And she gets disappointed when the big story of the week is a squirrel that was water skiing. That's how I see that.
And you're so right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
yes.
This is so sad. I'm smiling to keep from crying, but the sad ironies here are just infinite. The very people who right now, who are disingenuinely screaming about the need for unfettered free speech.
Yeah.
Okay, in other words, give me permission to lie. But the people who are talking the most about unfettered free speech are the same people banning books. This conversation's over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I worry about, what's his first name? But Musk buying
Elon.
Beeline.
Yeah.
Elon Musk. This is going to be another one of these watershed moments in our history that a single individual can spend $44 billion, I think that's a price tag, in order to buy this media outlet. And he's made it very clear, his dislike, if not hatred, of Biden. I think it's a matter of time before this becomes the new Fox News conduit.
I think you're right. And again, I am in grave danger of bogging this whole show down right now, and it will be on me. So maybe we ought to do a separate show on this in the very near future. I've got a little bit different take on this.
Yeah.
Social media are not a public utility. And my point is this: I didn't get all worked up about Facebook regulations because in my mind, it's their blackboard. It's their playpen. It's their property. Okay, and free speech means you're free to say it. It does not mean you're free to say it on somebody else's platform without their permission. And it does not mean that you're entitled to an audience. So my feeling would be this: I didn't get worked up about Facebook, and I don't intend to get worked up about Twitter or about Musk. I understand this, but I would ask you this. In the name of free speech, Pitt, do you have a right to a column of your choice, your subject matter, as long as you want in the daily newspaper every day? Of course not.
No.
Are you entitled to 5 standing regular minutes on the 10 o'clock news?
Without a doubt, no.
How about no? In the name of free speech, can you come to my garage with a can of spray paint and spray graffiti on my garage? No. And why?
You can and suffer the consequences.
Exactly. And the thing is, I don't want to get bogged down into liberal and conservative because I think that's the bane of our discourse because we can't even decide what that means. But the idea that you can't spray paint my garage is a conservative notion. You don't have a right to be on somebody else's platform. You have a right to speak, but it has to be on either your platform or somebody else's platform with their permission. So I've just to keep from driving myself crazy and achieve some kind of serenity here, I'm not going to get worked up about the Musk thing. Mm-hmm. What do you guys think?
I don't want to get worked up about it, but it does worry me a bit because I can't see the end game.
Yeah,
I'm just leery of it. There's something. What's the phrase about something's fishy in the state of Denmark?
Yeah.
Something smells rotten.
Something's rotten.
Rotten.
In the state.
Yeah, I can't put my finger on it, but I don't trust it.
Yeah,
and I don't even know why I don't trust it.
Jonathan Haidt. Haidt, I just want to say that, takes Zuckerberg to task. Says this is a young man who has zero sensibility or understanding of human behavior, human psyche, how people come to decisions, how people come to their own beliefs. And in the face of all that naivete, he launches this thing, which doesn't call for anybody to identify themselves or carry any responsibility. So like all the boundaries are dissolved. So now I can just rant. So there's something about when we say something, there ought to be a mandate. You have to identify yourself.
Oh, I completely
You have
agree.
to be responsible for what you're saying, and not in this anonymous black hole of the social media world.
And totally agree, but I also think there's an element of caveat emptor. Okay, we as information consumers, we've got to be smart enough to identify that as what it is and reject it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're bringing back in what I was feeling earlier as being lost in the culture generally is a sense of discernment.
That's a great word.
Can I discern what's rotten in Denmark and what's fresh and wholesome and nutrient in Denmark? That ability to discern is part of the stupidifying of the American individual. Yeah, making one more stupid. I can't tell this from that.
Well, when you're young and you're new to the game and that's all you know, you don't know the difference.
You don't know the difference.
That's where it's all blending into this gray.
And now, because
And you can't blame someone for that, I feel.
I
Especially
agree.
if you're young.
It really
if
gets
you know
worse.
better.
Because now,
right.
since we're our own gatekeepers all the time, you're not even exposed to any concept or idea with which you disagree. It's not a question of rebutting it. You just never heard it in the first place.
You don't get the message at the beginning. No, this is the silencing of ideas, of contrary opinions. You know, Rollo May, brilliant psychiatrist, published in 1972. He first published Love and Will, and then he published Power and Innocence in 1972. And he coined the term the pseudo-innocent American. It's a pseudo-innocence. And then he develops that. And his reading of Melville's last work, Billy Budd, is the most brilliant, insightful essay that I've ever seen. And Billy, if you remember the story, is a puer. He's the young, handsome, everybody loves Billy. He is he is disliked by the first mate Claggart, who spreads misinformation that Billy is planning a mutiny on board, and I forget the ship. It's a whaling ship. And complete fabrication. Billy is called in front of the captain, and Claggart has to accuse him right there on the quarterdeck. And he does. Now, Billy has a defect. When he gets excited, he begins to stutter, and he can't speak. So when Claggart accuses him of this mutiny, Billy begins to stutter, and then his right hand shoots out, and he hits Claggart in the face, and he's dead before he lands on the deck. And now, according to maritime law, Billy has to be hanged. And at the end of the story, he's hanged. Now, May sees in Billy Budd the archetype of the pseudo-innocent. I'm innocent, I'm well-liked, until an obstacle comes in my way, and then I can't handle it except by violence. It's a beautiful allegory, but it comes back, and May, I think he coined the term, the pseudo-innocence. And that's, I think, what's alive and well and loose in the American psyche today.
Would there be a relationship between pseudo-innocence and plausible deniability?
Boy, it's a good one.
Are people trying to wash their hands?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's Pontius Pilate. Let me just clean my hand. That's Lady Macbeth washing her hands. You know, not a problem. That's Trump. Always washing his hands. I didn't say that. Did I? They're the ones that showed up at the Capitol. I was watching TV. Just
think about this. They will tell you you didn't see what you saw.
Exactly.
You didn't hear what you heard.
Yeah.
You didn't see the documents.
Yeah.
And really, we were talking about the fact that it sounds so ridiculous to suggest that there might be people who would deny that Kent State ever happened.
Yeah.
Except that's not true. Have we been paying attention? We have people routinely every day denying discernible, observable, documented facts and tell you that never happened.
Yeah.
The Holocaust never happened. Kent State never happened.
Right.
January 6th never happened.
No.
So as ridiculous as it is, we have to resist that on a daily basis.
Well, so much to the point that there are millions of people who believe there are crisis actors who work all around the world in these crises moments.
Oh, actors playing dead people in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So Putin trying to liberate, trying to denazify Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's absurd, but because it's so absurd, we have to be ever vigilant.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I agree with both of you are saying. There's something insidious underneath it. In other words, see, I mean, I think in many cases, they know exactly that they're lying through their teeth. But if these crazy denials breed distrust,
they work
in the audience, they've won. Mm-hmm. I think it's about casting doubt in the most outrageous ways based on the assumption that there are so many people so willing to believe this.
A fact is anything I want to believe.
That's it.
And fiction is anything that runs counter to that.
Yeah.
So see what happened here? It all folded back into mythology.
Yeah.
Sometimes myths aren't even myths. Dennis Slattery, it has been so great to have you here. We're really, really honored. The one thing, though, young man, don't let me ever see you smile again.
Okay.
Especially not in a newspaper.
Yeah.
No.
Don't we
No, we're on the internet, no smiles.
No, got to be a frowner.
Yes.
Going to be a frowner. Maybe we can retake this.
No, we're good. Go ahead, share. Yeah, no. The reason we can? That guy right there is magic.
He's the magic man.
That dude right there is God.
Yes.
Well, this was a wonderful conversation. I loved it. And I mean, conversation, I think, is at the heart of civilization and culture. And when conversations cease happening, then I think there's a kind of hopelessness.
That is so true. My wife and I were at Top Golf here in San Antonio last weekend, and we saw a group of guys together. They looked like high schoolers. They had a big table all sitting around the table. No one was talking. They were all on their phones. She said, "Look at that." And I was like, "Yep, I saw it. It was sad. It was sad."
It's a scene you see all the time.
Yes.
I still have the habit of going to a gym. Now, I try to distance myself. I wear a mask, but I go to a gym, and I'm like the oldest dude in the gym. And I see all these young people allegedly working out, and the heaviest thing they're lifting is their phone.
Mm-hmm.
And they just cannot stand to be away from it
No.
for even a second. And there's got to be something dehumanizing about that.
Yes.
Dennis Slattery, again, I want to thank you so much. Pitt, good to see you. And Top
Thank
Golf,
you.
man, are you a big hitter?
I haven't hit in 20 years.
Oh my
But
God.
you know what? After a few bad swings, I hit okay.
Nice.
I mean,
That's
I'm not Tiger Woods, but I hit okay.
And that's no myth for sure. We thank you for paying attention to Radically Rational, the podcast. Want to invite you to our website at radicallyrational.com. It'll explain the concept to you. We've got blogs, we've got daily videos. We have all of our podcasts archived. We thank you so much. Remember, again, we're bringing facts back into fashion. We're doing everything we can to make simple sanity sexy again because it's out of vogue right now, and we're just not into crazy at all. Crazy is crazy. See you next time on Radically Rational.